What's up, everybody? We are officially at ground zero of 2026, and I did a bad job of keeping everything even and updated and out there on my 2025 hunting season. So I'm going to do a relatively quick little recap of what happened, and then we're going to roll into it, start all over. It's a new year, so none of that stuff really matters. Take what you learned, adjust what you can, and move on and learn from your mistakes. Started, I think, opening day for me. I went out and I was working in an area that I didn't really have any experience scouting because I move around job site to job site a lot, so it's hard to say in the spring, oh, I'm going to be here and go out and spring scout. So I just kind of, for most of October, I usually just, besides weekends, I usually just go out after work when I have time, which is most days, and just try to get dialed in that one area. And where I was, I just couldn't catch a groove or get on anything really. Um, there's access issues. It was like tight, kind of like suburban area, and if you don't have a lot of good private permission, you just run into a lot of other hunters. Not that I'm making excuses. I should have been able to get on something, but ultimately didn't, and that went on for a couple of weeks. One day I went out one Saturday in October. It was raining, just nasty day, so I just still hunted around a property I know pretty well, and got up on these ridges and the wind's blowing over them, and I'm just sneaking my way along. Binoculars are out looking. Then I stopped and paused in a spot and scan everything in front of me. Looking. Don't see anything. All right, time to move. Probably 10 minutes had gone by of me being in that one spot. And the first step I take to get out of there, a doe and a fawn stood up, and they ran and paused probably 40 yards. Had a lane, had an arrow nocked, but I just felt the way about shooting the doe with the fawn, so they eventually ran off, and that was the end for that day. Another time in October, a weekend in October, I had gone and pushed in and set up in a spot where I knew bucks have bed in the past on the trails leading out of the bedding, hoping for one to come out. And the whole hunt went by, and I was thinking, man, I'm not. The thought went through my mind a few times where I wasn't close enough to where I needed to be. So that ultimately came true shortly after the sun had gone down. I'm at the base of the tree packing up all my stuff, and I take 2 steps away from the tree, and I hear a deer run off coming from where I thought they would. And it sounded like it was 40-ish yards away from me from where I was. So if I had picked up that another 50 or another 70 yards closer to where I thought I needed to be, I probably would have at least seen the deer. I don't know what it was, but I'm assuming it was a buck because it was alone. And also in October, I found in a swamp a nice 8-point deadhead, which I ended up leaving there, but the antlers wrapped around and they almost touched at the tip. So it was one of the tines was missing and another one was 80% chewed off. And it had been sitting there for a couple of years. I'll put the picture up, but it had been sitting there for a while and it was thick stuff, and I just didn't want to carry him out of there. He'd already been there. He belonged there. So, and then ended up moving job sites right like either the last week of October or first week of November, something like that. And so then this was a little bit better of an area. I had a lot of public ground state forest property, and there was one area that I was particularly interested in based on maps. So went in there the first day, kind of like crept into this area just looking around, and like at face value it's one of those spots that you get into where you're not seeing a lot of sign, but you can tell deer are traveling through just based on the way the ground looks and everything and all the trails. So the other thing that kind of gave me some apprehension and was like off-putting about the spot was it was close relatively to the road, and if I can pick it off on a map, so should a lot of other people. So I was kind of working my way in there, figuring I'm going to run into somebody's setup or something. Didn't run into that, which is good, obviously. So I wasn't blowing up anybody's spot that they had already set up, and it was open for me. So first day, I'm just going to throw a sit at it, kind of observe and see what's up, what goes on. And it's a super, I guess it's more so like a travel corridor pinch, like pinch point kind of area, but it's not like your standard pinch. It's got a lot of different travel routes coming into it. But the issue with it that I found is you're in it, and if you got your wind in your face, it's blowing out this big mountain laurel patch that's behind you, and the trails come in off the sides of it and hopefully around. And then there's a bedding patch off to the left, and there's a swamp in front that the deer work around, and there's another swamp that has a big travel lane that deer come around. And what forces them your way is it's the easiest around, is there's a big ridge that comes up off, probably it would be like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock from where I sit, or where I did sit. And so first day I'm in there, I'm up in the tree just kind of checking out, seeing if it is what I think it is. And it was probably an hour before last light. And of course I'm watching ahead, from 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock front, because I wasn't, at the time I wasn't thinking something was going to come in from behind me. Well, a doe comes in behind me, and by the time I see her, she's like way too close. Snuck in on me, maybe 15 yards or something. I see her, and she must have caught my scent or something, because I just looked with my eyes. I didn't turn or move or anything. And she bounded off to about 35 yards in a hole, but I didn't have a doe tag for that zone in the state. So couldn't really do anything, just watched her. She worked off a little bit more, stood there, stared, did all kinds of stuff, like wanted to go that way, but knew something was up. So, she eventually works away, light fades, I get down, get out of there. And it would have had to be the first week of November. It was the first time I went in there. So I didn't go in the next day, I don't think. Kind of stayed out of it a little bit. I did have one sit after that where I didn't see anything at that spot, which might have been the next one. And I'm thinking to myself at that point, after I have one dead set in the doe and the first one that busts me, I'm like, I'm going to throw one more at it and see what happens. And we get to a Friday, and probably 30 minutes before end of shooting light, looking, and I see a big body deer with a smaller rack, but nice. You can tell he's built like a bull. He's got that blocky body and that walk to him, and he's staying in this laurel patch that's off to my left, and he's just inside of it. But it's all, if you're standing up, it's all probably like lower chest height, so you can kind of see like his body in spots and see a rack. And he works in and through, and then dumps off the side of the hill. He paused a couple times, but there was no shot to him. It was 50 yards, 55 where he was standing, where he stopped and paused. But I didn't have, obviously it's public, and it was the first time I ever really been in there. that week, so can't really clear shooting lanes. So there was no feasible way for me to shoot them. So that next day, and I normally don't ever do this, but I said, I'll go right back there. So I left my stuff. I left my steps in the tree, took my bow out. I left. Yeah, that's pretty much all I left. So I could just get in there in the morning, get set up, done. Fast, easy. So I go in the next morning, get set up, and at 9 o'clock, right about from the other direction, I see a nice deer coming at me outside the ears, chocolate rack. What I'm hoping to shoot, and he comes in right through, comes to 20 yards. But the issue is he's on my offside and he's moving like he's seeking and chasing does, or seeking a doe rather. So his head's down, and people who know, when they're moving like that, they're not screwing around. They're getting to the next spot. So they're not running, but it's very fast walking. And so by the time I see him to where he's at where I can shoot him, it's seconds. Probably just about the time for me to get my bow off the hanger and start to like spin at him. And the problem was that it had rained the night before, and so I was using the Bowman strap-on steps, and thought didn't even really cross my mind, and I hadn't heard it till then. But I went to pivot my foot, and it squeaked, and he locked up, stopped, and was staring, looking, trying to see where that came from, and think. So at that point, I'm stuck, can't move because he's gonna pick me off then, and he turns around, pauses for a good while. It felt like 5 minutes. He was just staring there, staring, looking, spins around and goes back where he came from. So there's issues obviously there that I needed to address. After I picked up my bow off the hanger, I realized there wasn't going to be a way for me to maneuver around the tree. Plus, he was already alerted. So I think timing wise, it might be better to definitely, for when deer are rutting or pre-rut or whatever, when they're looking for does, bucks are, it might be better. I think I'm going to run a platform next year just so I can maneuver on that platform, because things just kept happening to me, and this wasn't the first time it happened, but things would materialize too fast for me to be able to maneuver around the tree and take a strong side shot. So, and maybe if I was on a platform and it rained, it might not have squeaked. Don't know. Speculative. But basically what I learned is, if you're going to use strap-on steps and it rains or they're wet, you got to wipe them off. And so, yeah, that was pretty much the end of that. I did hunt there a couple more times, and I never had a buck come in again, but I got burned by that same doe. She came out of the same spot, caught her right when she was coming out of her little patch that she's in, and she knew immediately. So that was also the first time where I had a deer figure me out that I can remember. So basically she patterned me, and that was a wrap for that spot. And I took a week off, and I brought a friend of mine who had only hunted his family property his whole life up until this point. Took him out on a piece of public that I hunt a decent amount, and told him where to go, get set up, and do his thing over there. I went off to another spot, got set up. I sat all day. I think I saw 8 turkeys, and that was about it. And he hunted. He got down partway through the day, and kind of just looked around, checked stuff out, and he saw a 4-point go flying by him. But that was the end of his hunt, and it poured rain that day at the end of the day. So we ended up soaked in no deer, and it's just how it goes. And so that next day, I went back to that same piece, but I moved spots because I was in the tree looking out, and I was like, man, I should be over there, just thinking it all day, but I just didn't move because now we're, in the rut for sure. So next day I set up in the spot that I wanted to be the day before, and it took till about, I think it was 12:30, and I saw him coming a ways off, and I didn't know what it was, but I see a doe running, and most of the time when you see a doe running during bow season, something's following them. So I got my bow off the hanger, and they fly by me at 15 yards, perfect. She flies by first, and I see the buck chasing her, and it's a little fork horn, so didn't feel like shooting them. Hung the bow back up because I was waiting out, hoping that something else was going to be trailing them too. Um, and I waited all the rest of the day, and nothing was following it. So that same day, we get to last light, and I see deer at the bottom, in the bottom, coming up, and they're going to cross in this another. It's a funky pinch point, same kind of thing, and so they get to the bottom, and they turn 90 degrees and come right through. Basically, they're going to step in the same spot as the deer did earlier in the day. So these are all does, two does, and then something else that never made it up the hill by me in the daylight. So first one's a nice doe. Take the bow off the hanger, get clipped in. Now I had already sat all day, and it was windy, very cold day, and it was Veterans Day, and I'm getting ready. She's coming through 15 yards. I get to half draw, and the bow goes off. And like in the midst of the bow going off, I punch myself in the nose with my right hand, my release hand, and I drop the bow out of the tree in that whole situation, and look up, and the doe is still standing there, not knowing what was going on because the wind was so high that day. It was gnarly, and I'm holding my release, and I look down because my first thought was like, oh, my D loop broke, right? Like I've done that before. I've punched myself in the face the same way with a D loop breaking and dropped the bow that time too. Literally the same thing. And so I look down, and I'm like, well, the jaws are open on the release, so I definitely hit the button. So then I'm sitting there, and all this time the first doe works off, second one comes in, third one kind of gets hung up at the bottom of the hill, doesn't want to come through. So I'm like trying to figure out what happened, and I start moving my hands. And what had happened was my hands went numb, so I must have just not felt my thumb and just squeezed the button when I was drawing back. Excuse me. And so that was the end of that day. And then the whole rest of the week, I kind of bounced around, which I shouldn't have. I should have went right back there the next day, but that's hindsight for you. And bounced around quite a bit, trying to get on, a couple other spots that I knew heat up a little, heat up pretty good around that week. So struck out the rest of the week, nothing really to report. Went back to work, and hunted a couple times after a week in different spots around there, and then ended up being we're down to the wire now. So at that point, I feel like I had my chance at two deer, the doe and the buck with the chocolate rack in that one spot. So now we're talking the day before Thanksgiving. Bow season's over on Saturday, so it's the Wednesday. A friend of mine had shot a really nice, like lifetime deer for this area, so I was excited for him. Left work, we got out of work early, and went over, and I said to him, "Hey, I want to come check out your deer with you and hear the story. Went over there, checked out his deer, and it was just a beautiful deer for this area, and it was an incredible achievement for him. And so by the time I get done talking to him, it's late in the day, but I got maybe an hour and a half of light left by the time I left his house. So thinking to myself, like, well, I've shot deer when I only had 30 minutes, you know? So went to my parents' property, where I grew up, because I have a stand there and it's just a click in, easy in, no big deal. Get up in the tree, and I'm in there. And right, like 5 minutes before the end of legal shooting light, I see a deer coming off my left out of the thick stuff, and again, he's moving pretty quick. Well, I thought it was a doe at the time, but I'm like, all right, here we go. Like, this may be your last opportunity of archery season, so it's go time. This is the make or break shot for taking a deer with your bow this year. And I'm not a guy who, I have good intentions when the season starts, but you can see the window closing. Like, time's running out here. So at that point, in my mind, any deer is a shooter now. So I see what I think is a doe coming in, and I'm decided in my mind, made up my mind. All right, this deer is dying. Coming in fast, coming in behind me on the run behind that is behind my stand, and the wind's blowing. Like, he's got wind to tail. Like, he's going with the wind. So I'm not going to be able to shoot him here fast enough. So I spin in the stand and I shoot him at probably 8 o'clock behind me, and get drawn back, anchor in, get ready, try to give him the mat to stop him. He doesn't stop. He keeps moving. So now I'm just carrying through, poof, shoot him. And it's 20 yards, like point blank. And I hit him a little bit farther back than you'd like, but at that point he was quartered away pretty good. So I wanted to hit him somewhat farther back and high and get the arrow to drop, because I'm 20 feet up and he's 20 yards in, so you got the angle. And I hear the distinctive pop that you want to hear when you shoot a deer with a bow. So listen, I watch him run off, and shortly after I lose sight of him, I hear him tip over. So I know it's, you feel good about it, like it was over quick, got him and everything. So collect myself a little bit, call my dad and just let him know I got one. And so get out of the tree, walk back down to the house, go down, grab my dad in the quads, go back to the spot, found the arrow. It took me a little bit to find the blood trail because he had went off a little bit slightly different direction than I had remembered. It was just lower on the hill than up higher. Tracked him up, and he only made it probably 70 yards, and he was down. So it was just a cool moment. I've up until that point, I had never shot a deer with a bow on my family property, which is like one of the only pieces of private ground that I hunt here and there. And it was a stand that I had hung probably 5 years ago and never really hunted much, just was off doing other stuff. So it ended up being a really cool moment, memory, even though it was a tiny deer. It was a little spike. Almost wanted to be a 3-point, but I'm calling him a spike. And there's only going to be so many more times where I get to call my dad, but he doesn't hunt, but he always comes out and retrieves deer with me up there if I get him up there. And day before Thanksgiving, basically a buzzer beater. And so it was just cool, and I'm happy with him. This wasn't what I set out to do, no, but I made the conscious decision to shoot that deer, and so you got to own them. regardless of whatever happens. And so no trail cameras. I don't have any out anywhere. So there's no cell cam data. There's no footage or anything. I'm just hunting like old school. And so that alone is somewhat of an accomplishment in itself, for sure. I mean, any deer is an accomplishment for anybody. I don't care who you are. And so I went out the next day, bow season, or no, that would have been Thanksgiving. I didn't go out Thanksgiving, so I went out the day after, which was a Friday, and to another spot that I knew was, from what I've gathered, is good around that time. And I got set up where I was thinking the deer were going to come off these points on a high ridge and drop down, and there's this bench that they come into sometimes. I found a beat up shed too in that, um, basically right below the tree. Or no, it was farther up the ridge. I found it, but I found a beat up shed antler that was nice. It had a good base on it. I'll put a picture up of that too. Obviously, I'll put a picture up of the deer that I had shot at my parents' property. And so started snowing on that sit. Wind was good. It was blowing like off down to the bottom. I was kind of like on the back on the side of the bench. There was good sign in there. You could tell they were traveling through there. And I look off. We're probably 15 minutes before the end of shooting light, 20 maybe. And I look over and I saw something move, saw a movement. And this is like kind of behind me, but since that doe had taught me that lesson, now I'm looking behind me a lot more because you never know what's going to happen. And so I see movement and I'm watching, and then it moves again. So I break out the binoculars, and the whole time, like, it was just, he was moving through thick stuff and timber, and I say he, I don't know what it was. The whole time I was trying to get a bead on it with my binoculars and see what was on his head, his or her head. And it had went up on top of the ridge and then just kind of worked off. And like right when I would have been able to see what was on it for headgear, it went over the other side, and that was it. And I couldn't see it anymore. So that was basically my last encounter with the bow. And then another cool moment was opening day of shotgun season. I had went out with my uncle and his crew of guys that do deer drives, which are all older now. And so they're not as serious as they once were. And they didn't get any deer between their group last year. So we went out and we ended up in a spot. I took them to it. I pushed for both drives that we did up there. First one, I got some does moving for them, but they kind of snuck out the side and nobody got a shot. So we went and did the other side, and right at the end, a 4-point kick, or no, that was a spike. A spike kicked out, and one of the guys shot him, and he was down right there, and it was just cool because it's one of those moments where there's only so many more of those left where all those guys will be together that I grew up and started hunting with. I mean, that group, when I was 5 years old, used to take me out with them when they did deer drives, which most of those guys are just strict drive hunters. They don't hunt really any other way. So it was just cool to have another time to pay them back a little bit. And times they're I hate to say it, but a lot of them are in their twilight of their deer hunting careers, and to see the end coming and to be able to be there with them for it is just it's cool. And I'm happy to be there, and I'm happy to pay them back, and it's definitely emotional to think about a little bit, but that's life. And so that was pretty much my only memorable moment from shotgun season. Didn't even, nothing really. I went out a couple more times and there's nothing really to report there. Most of it is I do my duty doing drives for those guys, and then they kind of taper off, and then muzzleloader season I get back into it for myself. Getting into muzzleloader season, I shot an 8-pointer. And it was on public, and I had sat a spot, and I didn't really like the feel of it, so I got out of the tree that I had set up in, and I just wanted to work over this edge where I'd seen a buck come out during bow season before because I knew they were coming out there and feeding, and the pattern seemed like it was still going on. So I get down, and the snow had gotten just soft enough by that point. The temperatures had come up. Days before that, it was all crunchy. And so I start working over to this edge. Got probably 15 minutes of legal light left, and I just want to work down it. And then it kind of peters out, and then I'll just walk back to my truck after that. So I get down it. I'm probably not, 5 minutes into it, and I see a body, and it looks like a decent sized body for a deer. So the deer's got its head down behind a log, and it's just feeding. So I pull my gun up, get the scope on him because I didn't have my binoculars, and I watch it for a little bit, and it seemed like forever before he finally picked his head up, and I see, rack buck, main beams, see a G2 on it. So I'm thinking, well, it's probably at least a 6-pointer. So by this point, all this is going on. Like now I'm starting to get the buck fever. Like the nerves are getting to me. So like, I know I put the scope on him. I can hold it on him, but it's not my best move to take a shot right then and there, put it in him and be done with it. If this was 5 years ago, I would have just pulled the gun up and shot it and figured it out later because I had an antlerless and a buck tag for that spot. Well, I'm getting hiccups. So I know I can't responsibly make that shot now. So I got to get to a tree, find a rest, get settled in, then take my shot now. So I start scooting over to a probably 5-inch diameter tree that's nearby so I can get up on it and use it as a rest. And as I'm doing that, he starts working off. And he's moving like kind of fast, and I'm like thinking I might have spooked him a little bit, which it turned out I didn't. And so I get on that tree, get set up ahead of him where he's traveling, and he comes right through the lane. And then so I got to get ahead of him again. But when I get ahead of him again, he had stopped, turned, and started milling around and feeding again. So here we go. I'm on him. Crosshairs are on him. Squeeze the shot off. Boom. Big puff of smoke in my face. Can't see anything, so I can't see obviously the body reaction to see if I hit him or anything. He goes running out of there, and like I'm watching him now. And as that's going on, I'm reloading the gun. Start reloading the gun, and he stops. He only made it maybe 50 yards, 60 yards, but he's still in a spot where I could get another one into him. So I'm reloading the gun. I got the powder in. I got the bullet started. And I can see him get woozy, and then he just tips over, boom, dead. So that was the end of it there. I reloaded the gun and got up to him fast enough but he was already expired by the time I had got there. But in the midst of all that happening, he shed his antlers. So now I have a set of rattling antlers, or I could mount them on one of those European mounts that they sell, which might be what I end up doing. And I thought my knee-jerk reaction, well, obviously at the time this was going on, I thought this was the same buck that had come out during bow season when I had hunted that. I had sat that spot probably a week and a half before, and or 2 weeks before or something like that. And that one was like a full curl, almost nice good mass antlers. Didn't get to count points because I saw him from maybe 50 yards, 40 yards, something like that. But I couldn't shoot to him. There was no way to get a shot off. And I'm looking at him, and when he came out, it was like 5 minutes before the end of the legal light, and I needed him to come closer. And so I identified he was a buck, nice buck, through my binoculars. So I was thinking that the deer that I shot with my muzzleloader was that same deer. And I get over to it, and there's no real amount of me that's disappointed. I made a decision again, and I thought it was something else, but that'll happen from time to time, I guess. And I get over there, and it's just a small 8-point, which I was thinking was a 2-year-old at the time, but like the more time goes by, he might have only been a 1-year-old, but the body size, it's hard to tell because most 1-year-olds in our area are usually spikes, forkhorns, narrow basket racks. Like they don't have spread with they're not rack bucks. But we have had a couple easier winners in a row, and I've heard of other deer that were 1.5 years old being 8 points. But either way, I'm happy. Another deer did run off with him after I shot, which I have no clue what that was. Not in the slightest, because I didn't even see that other one. Another one of my favorite moments was a friend of mine was out hunting on his property, and he dropped his bow out of the tree. Something he had used the same gear strap for his bow and his binoculars or something. He moved his binoculars, and his bow went out of the tree, bent the bottom cam. But luckily for him, smart for him, he had bought a spare bow, and so he brought that thing over. We tuned it up here in one night, and he was back out hunting pretty much the next day. And a week later, or a week and a half later, he got the opportunity and shot a nice, for sure, 2-year-old 7-pointer on his property. So that was a cool moment, and I'm happy to help him. But it was just great. That was that's an achievement in itself too, because I've shot deer with bows that I tune, but maybe I only tune a couple other people's stuff, and he was like, he might have been the second one to shoot one with a bow that I tuned, so that was cool. And then my best friend, the one I had taken out and hunted, he hunts his family property. Mostly that's about it, which is, it's an apple orchard, which after the season ends for them, for their people going and picking apples and pumpkins and everything like that, he gets out and hunts. So he goes out one day and just shoots a magnificent 8-pointer. The only thing it didn't have was long brow tines, but I mean the deer had everything else: wide, long tines, mass, everything. Just an awesome deer. And I was super happy for him. Didn't get to help with the recovery or anything, but that day I went over and checked it out with him, and it was a very nice deer and another great achievement for him. So still got a bloody arrow in the quiver, and bloody arrow and Pink Montec took a deer. So pink, they're not just for girls, all right. If they're on sale, I'm buying them. So that's the end of that. This bow's been awesome. It's been just the best bow I've owned, but goes without saying, buy what you like, and that's the end of it. Nobody who gives a shit. It doesn't really matter what brand it is: Chinese, Japanese, Matthews, Hoyt, Bear, PSE, whatever. Shoot what you want to shoot. But yeah, to bring it all home, got beat by some deer that I shouldn't have. If I was 5% better at that time, maybe 2% better at that time, that won't happen. Um, easy fixes too. It just maybe if it's cold out, keep some hand warmers in your pockets, and that doe's dead, and then run a platform, and maybe that big chocolate rack buck was dead too. I don't know, but the 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 lines between success and failure are super thin, and early at the beginning of this year, I kind of had like an attitude about it where I was like, I don't need luck, which you do. You definitely do to some degree. Like you can do all the right things, put yourself in the right spot time and time again. You're going to have encounters, but as far as, things coming together perfect and like that deer's coming down the lane that it needs to versus going the other way, or your boots not squeaking, or your hands not going numb. You could definitely mitigate all that stuff, but you definitely need the element of luck a little bit. But uh, if you're successful all the time, you're not going to rely on it. And it's not something that you want to rely on. You want to remove as much of the luck as you can. And so, you know, I learned keep some hand warmers in your pocket, maybe use that an XL platform, especially when it's rutting or when the deer are rutting, and dial in some spots a little bit better and be back at it again before too long. It comes up on you really fast. So that's it. I was my intention in the beginning of the season was I wanted to shoot a 3 or 4 year old deer, and ultimately didn't get that goal achieved. But that'll happen from time to time. You know, I can't win them all. A lot of people can, but I can't. And as the windows were closing, I knew I wasn't a guy who was going to sit there and not put in all that effort that I do shooting and tuning my own equipment and practicing and practicing climbing trees and even just scouting and out hunting to not take a deer with it. I wasn't that wasn't going to sit right with me. And you know not sitting right with me matters more than me shooting a small deer not sitting right with somebody who really doesn't mean anything to me in the grand scheme of shit. Shoot what you want, have fun, and if you get to a point where you're not having fun, maybe you need to adjust your uh, criteria or adjust your style or adjust your attitude or whatever you want to call it and make it fun again for you, because we are kind of we're living in an illusion where it seems like everybody's shooting big deer. But I went up and looked up the stats for my state, specifically Massachusetts, and there's right around 50,000 hunters total, and 16,500 deer roughly get harvested in a year. So do the math on that. I mean, it's less than 50%, and there's 30,000 bow hunters in the state. And out of those 30,000, 6,500 deer, I don't know bucks or does, get harvested every year. So, like again, do the math on that. Your odds aren't great based on that. So, I'm happy to be one of the 6,500, whether it's shooting a spike or shooting an 8 point or shooting a 9 point or shooting a big deer or shooting a small deer. the odds aren't in your favor, but you can increase those odds for yourself, and that's where you're learning. So I got a lot to learn, a lot to work on. Got to get back shooting because I haven't shot that since I shot the yeah I haven't shot it since I shot the spike. So time to get back to the fundamentals, get dialed in, and start all over again. Because now all that shit's in the rear view. Everything that happened last season is gonna exist only in my memory, this video and pictures and what's on the wall. Or so that's the end of it. Time to put what I learned to good use and move on. So that's the wrap up for the 2025 season. I'll try and do a better job documenting everything that happens from here on out. But yeah, thanks for watching.